familiar with that term.
Well, it's really hard to define because there's so many different roles for hydrologists. My role here at the Weather Service is to be in charge of the program that we look at preparedness and education for anything water related, especially when it becomes an impact, be it flash flooding or snowmelt runoff, and then carrying through the early warning process and just really getting the information out to the public on current weather threats associated with water.
I know that we've all been keeping an eye on this stellar snowpack. I think I spoke with you in early March or even late February, and asking you, hey, what are things looking like? So we've had a chance to get through at least some months of this spring.
Yep.
Where are we now? What's the status of
It's still a stellar snowpack. We're still at record levels currently. That's even more phenomenal because now we're getting on, next week's going to be May 1, right? So we have melted a little bit of that snow, primarily at the lowest elevations. We still have abundant mid and high elevation snow, and that snow's still sitting at record levels.
From a threat perspective, would you have liked to have seen more snow melted at this point, or is this good?
It's always a fine balance with how the weather dictates it. That last warm-up that we had about 10 days ago, that was a really good thing. We pulled a lot of that low elevation snow down. We're going into another warm-up, and that's going to start impacting that mid-elevation snow, where we're going to start really kind of charging that mid-elevation snow and start melting that off. So thus far, I wouldn't say it's been perfect. We have had several cool days that have kind of held things up. Every day we don't melt snow is a day we have to melt snow later in the season. But I'd say all in all, we've had these episodic warming and cooling trends that really, it's been quite beneficial.
Is it fair to say, define it for me, is it fair to say maybe not ideal, but pretty good?
Not ideal, but pretty good, absolutely. We haven't flipped the switch and just turned the heat on and kept it, where then we bring it all down at once, all those elevations. We've had episodic warming and cooling, which is good. Ideally, everything can always be a little bit better, right?
So like temperatures today, not great, maybe a little too cool?
Today, maybe a little bit too cool for this time of year, because every day, again, that we don't melt the snow, we push it off another day later in the future. But at the same time, we do like these brief cool downs because we start melting the snow during the warming periods. And then it's good to have a little cool down to check it and then warm it and check it, kind of like a stair step throughout the whole snowmelt runoff season.
So what is the outlook if we know, or assuming what we know, in terms of temperatures coming up?
So high confidence, we're going into high pressure. We're going to see significant warming of temperatures beginning later this week, continuing all the way into early next week. By the end of this weekend, once again in the Salt Lake Valley and portions of the Wasatch Front, we'll be looking at low to mid 80s temperatures. So that's a significant change from where we're at now. That's going to start melting snow again at a pretty good clip.
It's going to happen eventually, obviously. What are we looking at in terms of potential flooding, or do we know that yet?
Right now I'd prefer 70s versus mid 80s because that is a significant warming trend. We're going to have to watch the mid elevations very closely here as we get into late this weekend and into early next week for that mid elevation melt. A lot of areas in Weber County we're going to have to keep a really close eye on. Summit County as well, where we're going to start melting that snow. Known is that the rivers are going to start really cranking in a lot of areas when we get into this next warming trend. There are some areas that we are keeping a close eye on where it's a combination of water that's being released for flood control reasons downstream of area reservoirs, combined with that snow melt, and then just the snow melt in those mid-elevation areas that we could start seeing some flooding concerns develop early next week.
What's mid-elevation?
Mid-elevation, we're talking in that zone probably between about 6,000 feet and 8,500 feet in there, where we still have abundant snow at those elevations.
Is there do we know a percentage of the snowpack that's melted, or how much remains?
Well, so we do. Many major basins across the state of Utah are anywhere between 250 and 350% of normal for this time of year, but it gets really hard with percentages this time of year because a lot of areas, they don't have snow at this time of year normally. And now you're comparing a year where there's still abundant snow, and it throws those numbers off pretty significantly.
So how worried are you about the next month or so?
It's going to be a busy month. We're going to have to keep our eyes, to the skies and monitor the weather very closely. The knowns are we still have a record-breaking snowpack in place. We've only melted off low elevations and some south-facing slopes. When we warm up, we're going to see those rivers and creeks rise pretty quickly. The way I'm looking at it is between now and through the end of June, it's going to be a marathon. We've kind of dipped our toes into it. We've gotten to that first, break for water in that marathon with some of this localized flooding that we've been dealing with, but we've got a long ways to go. And, it's notable that we have a record-breaking snowpack, and the weather's going to dictate how that comes down. And with this warming trend, we're going to start, instead of dipping our toes into it, we're going to be getting about knee deep.
What is the outlook for May as a whole in terms of temperatures?
So we're pretty confident getting in through the first and second weeks of May that temperatures are going to be either normal or above normal, kind of averaged out over that period. We are going to still see some episodic cooling and some precipitation. Right now it looks like a good outlook where we don't just get the high pressure move in, sit overhead, warm us up and keep us really hot moving out through the whole month.
Two scenarios here. Is it still possible that we will experience some widespread flooding in places? And is it still possible that we won't experience widespread flooding?
Both scenarios are possible. And again, the weather's going to dictate that. It'll be either a strong spring storm that brings a lot of rain when flows are already high and elevated. That could bring widespread flooding. It could also be like flipping that switch and we go straight into summer. We get out of this episodic cooling and warming and just warm up and bring it all down at once. Right now, we don't foresee either of those happening over the next couple weeks, but we are expecting significant changes starting this weekend with river levels coming up and potential for isolated flood concerns next week.
Is it fair to say we will be seeing more localized flooding in the next few weeks?
I'd say that's fair, yeah. That's definitely a fair statement.
Is there anything I'm forgetting? Anything else you would want people to know kind of about this general issue?
Again, we've got a long ways to go. Right? We've been talking about flooding for months. We've been talking about the record-breaking snowpack. And we're just getting into the period of the year where we start, actually seeing that come to fruition. And that's going to last through June moving forward.